everyone, welcome back to day 3 of Mojo Programming for Artificial Intelligence tutorial. And this tutorial, you will learn fundamentals of functions in Mojo Programming. In this tutorial, I will cover how to define functions, arguments and returns, option arguments and keyword arguments, and also how to define argument mutability and ownership of function arguments. Function is a common terminology in all programming language. It is a block of code that can be reused multiple times. It can take arguments and return values as well. Here is the way how you can define function using append keyword in Mojo program. The append keyword is a keyword that's used to define function in Mojo programming and followed by the name of the function. For example, here I used do_math that can do any mathematical operations. So this is called a user-defined function, and every function has a block of code that can be executed. So inside this function, I have defined the variables x and y and assigned values to those variables. And also another variable that stores the sum of the value of x and y. The last statement prints the result of race variable. So inside this function is called a block of code or body of the function. But Mojo is a compiled programming language like C++, so it requires the entry point of the program execution. So this is called the main function. Every compiled programming language should begin the execution of the program from the main function. And we call other user-defined function inside that main function. So in this case, I just call the name of the function I have defined here inside the main function. When you run this code, it begins the execution of the program from the main function and automatically calls the function do_math and prints out the block of statements inside this do_math function. Let me run this code and see the output of this code. That is 15 because this 10 plus 5 is 15 and it returns the result of or the statement inside the do_math. And the other most important thing in function arguments and returns. Although types aren't required for variables declared in the function body, so they are required for arguments and return values for an append function in Mojo program. So let me comment this and let me define another function which is adding two numbers, for example, add and takes arguments like x and specify the type of the function per argument and another argument which is y, and we can also specify the type of the function, for example, integer. So every types of function except void should return values. So this function should return value x plus y because I statically define the type of the function which is integer and also statically define the type of the arguments inside this function. Okay, so this function returns the sum of x and y, and the return value should be integer, and the input of the arguments should be integer. Then I call the function here and store the result to the variable z, and I call this function, and it just highlights errors because add calls expected two arguments, but zero were specified here because I have defined two arguments. So I need to pass two arguments to this function. The first argument is, for example, 2, and the second argument is, for example, 3. If you pass more than 2, it still generates an error because the function has two arguments only, and the number of values we pass to the function and the number of arguments must be equal. Now I can print the value of z, and the function automatically calls here and assign 2 and 3 to the arguments x and y. And this function returns the sum of x and y. Let me run this code and let me see the output of the code. Okay, that is 5 because assigns 2 and 3 to the this function parameter arguments, and it's returns the sum of the arguments. The other thing in the function arguments is optional arguments. So we can assign default values to arguments. For example, let me assign default value to the argument y, and I can remove this. No error here because the second argument in this function has a default value. If I do not specify or pass the values to the second argument, it automatically takes the default value to that argument. And let me see the output of this code. That's 4. So initially, it has a default value of 2, and I didn't pass any values to this argument, and it takes the default value. If I pass, for example, 4 to the second argument, it will take the new value instead of the default value because it is optional. So if you do not pass the values to the default argument, it will take the default value as input. Otherwise, it will take the passed value to that argument. So this is called optional arguments or default argument. The other thing is argument mutability and ownership of arguments. In this case, you can't modify the argument value. So this is called borrowed arguments. So this is called borrowed arguments because you can't modify the argument x and y inside the body of this function. For example, let me modify x, increment by 1. It is error, so expression must be mutable for in-place operator destination. So because borrowed arguments are immutable references by default, so we need to give ownership of the arguments to modify the values to make it mutable. The other thing is, optionally, we can use borrowed keywords to define borrowed arguments. By default, arguments are borrowed arguments, but we can also specify the borrowed keyword, and that is called borrowed arguments. Because FN arguments are immutable references by default, this ensures memory safety, which means no surprises changes to the data, while also avoiding a copy, which could be a performance hit. So this is also called borrowed arguments. You can make it explicit with a borrowed declaration as showed here, like this, and this behaves exactly the same as the previous one without borrowed here. For example, this and either using borrowed keyword or without borrowed keyword, this is called borrowed arguments. You can't modify the values of the arguments inside the block of the function or the body of the function. But if you want to just modify or to make it mutable, you can use in-out arguments. For example, in-out keyword. So when you are using in-out keyword, automatically make an error in the function code. because you are required to modify or use the variable var, for example, var a assigned to, and then you can call that variable. Because this is modifiable, and this means that changes made to the arguments inside the function are visible outside the function as well. So, for example, this function is able to modify the original variable. So you can modify x increment by 1. So the original variable value is 2, but here you can modify inside the block of code or function. So when you run this code, and you can see that this is 7. Initially it was 2, but I have modified this inside the body of the function, and it is 3. 3 plus 4 is 7. So this is called in-out argument. So you can use in-out, for example, even you can use the second argument in-out, and you should define the outside variable, for example, 4 and b. Then you can modify the, for example, y3, and you can run this code. That is 10. Initially, I assigned 2 and 4 for x and y arguments, but here I modified the arguments inside the function, and the values, the result of the values are changing. Okay, this is in-out arguments. So this is for day 3 tutorial, and I just give you an assignment that is called reading assignment about owned arguments and how to transfer ownership of the arguments in Mojo Programming. And I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.